Thank you all so much for coming today, and I want to thank Thomas, Ron, and Dean for sharing their expertise and speaking with us. The purpose of this event is not only to commemorate an important moment in American history, but also to celebrate the existence of the Colorado Coal Project collection housed here at CU Boulder. As Leslie mentioned, the collection is the product of two research projects led by Dr. Ron McMahan and Dr. Eric Margolis, conducted while completing their graduate studies in sociology. The first project was funded by the Colorado Humanities Program in 1974, and the second by the National Endowment for the Humanities in 1977. Ron and Eric conducted in-depth interviews with coal miners, community members, and historians throughout the western U.S., many of whom witnessed firsthand the events that we're talking about today. The materials collected include video, audio tapes, transcripts, photographs, and slides. Recognizing that the older media formats are subject to deterioration and obsolescence, Jane and Ron McMahan made a generous gift in 2013 to digitize and publish this collection online so it could reach a wider audience and live on. It takes a significant amount of coordinated effort to scan, catalog, and publish a collection like this, so I'd just like to take a moment to thank the library staff and student workers who participated in this project. Michael Dulock, Crystal Faulkner, Cynthia Hardy, Dave Hayes, Patrick Mulcrone, Michael Liberty, Jane Zumwalt, Christian Diaz, Lacey Dunlavey, Sarah Hann, Mandy Sanchez, Ashley Seward, Cora Schneck, Prayesh Thapa, Jeff Wormer, Rosalind Wong, and Grace Zhang. The collection can be accessed from the CU Digital Library and contains 87 transcripts, videos, and more than 4,000 images documenting the history of coal mining in the western U.S., from immigration and daily life in the camps to labor conditions and strikes. I think the interviews are really at the heart of this rich collection, and I'd like to share a quick clip with you.
Oh, everything was safe here in Aguilar, sure. Then nobody bothered Aguilar. It was all around the mines.
Yeah.
And the different canyons. Royal.
Now, when they, as you remember, General Chase and the militia had left here shortly before Ludlow, and just left the two troops of mine guards in militia uniform, and left them at Ludlow. Then after Ludlow, and then after the miners took to the hills with their rifles, they sent the militia back from Denver with cannon. Did you see them come?
Yeah, well then the Rangers came. They called them Rangers. They had the uniforms and things. Those old camp guards got run out. They tried to restore peace here and all that, and they did. They did, but they was pretty tough too, you know. They treated us young kids tough because we was always nosing in all around where the danger was and everything.
You were probably throwing a few
they
rocks
restored
too.
Peace. Yeah, the Rangers, they called him Ranger James, was the big commanding officer or something here in Aguilar.
Yeah.
And McDonald and different ones that I can remember, but they was pretty nice guys. They was tough. They restored order and everything.
Yeah, but they weren't persecuting the miners.
I wouldn't doubt there's some more boxes of rifles hid in those hills there.
So you can see that the videos are really rich with emotion and memories. It's hard not to get drawn in. I hope you'll take some time to explore the collection and learn more about these events. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce our speakers. Ron McMahan has worked in the energy and technology sectors for more than 30 years. His research interests in the history of coal mining began during his PhD studies at the CU Institute for Behavioral Science and culminated in a series of documentaries for PBS. He has just completed a new documentary project that remixes portions of his original research with new material. Thomas Andrews is a history professor here at CU and specializes in the social and environmental history of the Rocky Mountain West. His first book, Killing for Coal, America's Deadliest Labor War, won numerous awards, including the Bancroft Prize, one of the most coveted honors in the field of history. Dean Saitta is professor and chair of the anthropology department at the University of Denver. Between 1997 and 2004, he co-directed the Colorado Coal Field War Archaeological Project, a Colorado State Historic Fund-supported project dedicated to better understanding events related to the 1913-14 Colorado coal field strike, including the Ludlow Massacre. This research culminated in 2009 with the designation of the Ludlow Tent Colony as a National Historical Landmark.
Thank you. What I thought I'd do is just give a real brief introduction as to sort of catch up on my own interest in this and what's gotten us to this point today. As Holly said, about 40 years ago, Eric Margolis and I were studying sociology. Interestingly, my grandfather was a Greek immigrant coal miner who ended up in Lafayette, Colorado, and in fact was killed in the mines. There's a mine right over by where the Kaiser Hospital is now, or I've forgotten the name of that hospital, but he was killed in that mine during the war. I never met him, but I had known a lot of people around this area, Lafayette, Louisville, Erie, Superior. This was, there were like 22 to 30 mines here, depending on who you talk to. So we sort of got interested in that and started doing ethnography and interviews, and it sort of unfolded like a tapestry as to all of the stories that people were telling. And from a historical point of view, it became quite interesting that there was no story of the wobbly strike in Columbine or the Ludlow strike or conditions or how you got here or what the situation was among the different races and ethnicities who lived here. And so as this all started to come together, we went through a methodology that allowed the public to become involved, the people we were interviewing to become increasingly involved in understanding what were the stories and the histories around all of this. And so the document that I think is going to be posted on this same site is a version of that through my eyes from these interviews and from what I heard, but also that integrates this sort of reflexive process that we called public editing. So as we showed it in 30 communities in different draft stages, and people would chime in, no, it wasn't like that, it was like this. And then we did what we could to help everyone understand that there are a lot of different stories and a lot of different ways that history is made. And so this thing is sort of, I'm interested in the project that Holly and her team have done because getting this resource out there and more available, I think more and more people will be able to sort of pick up on it and recreate, sort of what they're hearing from it. So I'll give you just a little brief background. Emma Zanatel is a woman who was living in Aguilar, Colorado. She grew up in the coal camps there. Her family went through the 1903 strike. She was married, had children in the tent colony. This is her story about the Forbes tent colony that was destroyed just about a month and a couple of weeks before the Ludlow tent colony was destroyed. This was sort of deep into the strike when the militia had decided, let's just get these tent colonies cleared out of here. You've got to remember that between 8,000 and 9,000 people were living in tent colonies spread up and down the Front Range from Walsenburg to Trinidad. So here's a part of Emma's story. Now, is that your tent?
That's my tent. Yeah, that's my tent colony in there. Daddy's got a rug or two out. That's him out there. He's trying to clean, I guess, while I was in bed.
During the strike, that colony got burned, didn't it?
Well, they burned some of them, and some they destroyed. You know, they just threw them down, just destroyed everything. You know, when they went to bury my twins, that was the first set of twins. Why, Mrs. Mosier said she'd sit with me while they went to Trinidad. So while they were gone, all of the tents were torn down, but two, mine and another one. So the militia came up to my place then, and one of them wanted to know, you know, that's what I was and all. And then he said, well, we ain't going to fool tearing this, and we'd just light a match to it. So there was another soldier. He said, I won't burn it. He said, I'll kill you before you hurt her. She's there sick in bed and they're burying her twins. You're not going to hurt her. So whoever he is, I always said a prayer for that boy. I don't know if he's alive or not, the soldier. You know, one was helped me and the other might have been gone.
The table that we were sitting at was the same tent, the same table that they had taken out of that tent. This was in 1974, or in the mid-70s. So this was roughly 60 years ago, and she still was sitting on that same table. You'll see in the video me going, this table? Pulling up the thing. This table was in a tent at Ludlow? Wow. She lost a set of twins, and then she lived in that tent colony for 2 years, long after the strike was over, because her husband was blacklisted, and she had more children in that tent, two more children in that tent. This clip is a fellow named Victor Basanelli. We got him on slides and tape. He unfortunately had passed away by the time we got back to his house with the video cameras. Remember, video was a pretty new thing in those days.
They send a lot of rifles for the strikers from back east, you know.
30-30s.
Yeah, 30-30s.
30-30.
I help unpack them and everything.
Yeah,
As kids,
yeah,
us kids was into everything, you know. And every time they'd shoot a scabble, we'd run down and see. I've seen some bloody heads and some dead ones and all
You know,
that.
Mike Lavora has one of those 30-30s.
This is a Winchester, 30-30. I took care of this thing because you never know how soon you might be forced to use it again. Here's the guy that you're looking at now, and here's the rifle. And this is some of our own army. This is the way we used to be armed.
And I'll tell you, you can see me in a small picture. I got a kind of white coat. I was a damn good shot. Impossible to beat, just about.
And did you shoot a militiaman then?
Oh, he was shooting at me.
Okay,
And then
which
I
gun
said,
did you
well,
have?
where the hell is he shooting from? And then only once I saw a light, kind of flashing light, you know, like the barrel of the gun. And I watched it. Then I saw him. There's the bugger. There he is. So I leveled up and I let him have it. And his gun flopped over. I saw the same light again, the barrel, you know, and him falling, but that I didn't know if he was dead or not.
There were militiamen killed, and there were thugs killed, and there were miners killed. There was warfare in Los Animas County. There's no question about it.
The same guy that you just saw, Victor Basanelli, was also in the Ludlow tent colony when it was destroyed. And you know, the part of the difference about sort of the oral history and the ethnography is that when you're talking to people, and what you'll find when you peruse this collection, I think a lot of Michael's students and the people that ended up being forced to watch hundreds of hours of this stuff, you got involved because there's more to it. This is just a very short clip Victor was one of the people who was at the colony, immediately after the fire, just before these guys went into the mountains to start what was called the 10 Days War. And so it's a little gory, but...
There were 11 kids, I know. 11 little on that. I don't know. It gets me, whenever I look at it, I can see it. I can see them. I can't help it. I can't help it. It stood in my guts all this time.
He often broke down in the interviews, and his son, who was also a coal miner, would do what they could to try to bring him back around. And you could just watch him these 60 years later internalizing, and you could just see him visualizing lots of different events of the day. Just a couple more. Good old Mother Jones was a major figure in the organizing of this strike, and here's a few clips about her.
It isn't very far. Those tents were so close together, and it's quiet at night. You get out there, you'll hear the people singing and playing.
Union forever.
Oh, boys are on, down with the militia, to hell with the law. For we're coming, Colorado, we're coming all the way, shouting the battle cry of Union.
Mother Jones, she was a radical. It hurt her to see a coal miner's wife with 7 or 8 kids and half-dressed, starving, and that's what hurt Mother Jones. She was a lovely old lady.
She was a fighter. She was a good fighter for laboring men, and she was fighting for labor all the time with Mother Jones. And of course, she may have not have done no dirty dishes, but she sure done a lot of good work for the Union.
I saw Mother Jones here.
Did you see Mother
Oh,
Jones?
yes, shook hands with her and everything. She was a fighting young old lady. She was beautiful. She had meetings here. The ball ground was so full of people you couldn't turn around. I don't know how many, 2,000-3,000 there, I'm sure. And she gave a fighting speech.
Did she swear at him a little? Oh, you bet she did, didn't she?
Well, she sure talked tough. She
Yeah,
sure riled everybody all up.
Alex Bussaco unfortunately passed away about 2 weeks after we did these interviews with him. We're so fortunate to, if nothing else, go listen to his tapes. He's a character. A lot of what we did was not about Ludlow, but was about life and immigration and community and what it was like to live in the coal camps in those days. The last one I'll just show quickly is this is a little bit about the 10 Days War that followed the Ludlow Massacre. It just runs a couple of minutes.
And they were called rednecks. The red bandana worn by the coal miners that was their uniform. They were called rednecks by the opposition.
So they had a red handkerchief on their neck, they got a rifle, and marched through Trinidad and went straight up the hill. See? So when they went up, the first mine that was meet was Forbes mine, and they started to destroy them.
We went into the Forbes, about 180 men with rifles. I told the boys as we went in, leave women and children alone, but rest of the things you can use your own judgment.
No, we don't know that they didn't shoot no people, nothing, just ruin the property, to do damage on the property.
And they killed mules.
Well, there wasn't a barn, so it can produce no more coal. No, by the time they bring some more mule and train them and everything, take a little time. Well, that's only way they can get revenge.
Yeah. Of course not.
Well, what would you do?
Now, this was the famous 10-day war.
Sure was. After the shooting started here, they burned all the camps and everything.
Yeah,
you know. And then those fellas that came here to break the strike, why, they took off with their mine clothes and everything on. And you know, all them old camp guards beat it through the mountains everywhere they could go. They was getting shot at left and right. The Empire Mine, they burnt that. And
Did you see the fire?
Sure, they burned all the houses. And then they burned all that, and then they went over here to the southwestern. They have houses there. And the bullets was whizzing through town here, all directions. And so after they burned all that down, they went up to the Royal, burned some more. They went up Broadhead and wrecked things.
It was a war. They had actual war in southern Colorado.
At one point there, after the massacre at Ludlow, the miners took Trinidad. And my sight, the thing I see, is my father in his car, open car. And he drove proudly around Trinidad. And on each corner, there stood a stalwart miner with his red bandana and his rifle. And as we drove by, they all saluted my father like a general.
So there's a little taste. The movie runs about an hour and 20 minutes. So Baron Bashor was the son of the doctor in Trinidad who treated most of the miners. He was one of the few doctors who was sympathetic to the miners' cause. And Baron later left Trinidad, in fact, became the Western Bureau Chief for Time Life, ultimately. But he was 12 years old when the strike was going on. So a lot of his stories are through the eyes of a 12-year-old, the sound of the horses on the streets and so on. So not much more to say. I think Thomas and others are going to have much more detail and a detailed understanding of a lot of the what happened when and how. And I know you used a lot of these resources when you were researching your book. And somehow, you know, you get to understand how it is, you know, how it is that this history was made. So I'll move on and if I can figure out how to turn this off and let you go on.
So I'm Thomas Andrews. I'm a historian, and this is a really wonderful thing, the launch of this collection online in a digital format. So I want to thank Ron and Holly and everyone at the library for making this happen. This is actually a really big deal for people who are interested in coal mining in southern Colorado, people who have a passion, like myself, for the sort of history of labor conflict in this part of the world. But I think this is also a big deal for people interested in American work, American workers, and the American working classes more broadly. So what I want to talk about really briefly is just some of the things that I learned from this collection. Okay? Yeah, so this collection played a really big role in my research. Those of you who've done history or, you know, any kind of historically oriented research, whether it's within the discipline of history or, you know, archaeology, sociology, all of these fields where we look at the past, know that there's this kind of iterative process where, we ask questions, we go to the sources. In the course of listening to the sources, we arrive at new questions and new understandings, which then we bring to other things that we read. And so, in the course of my work on the coal mining industry in southern Colorado and the culmination of a long and messy history of labor conflict in the Colorado Coalfield War of 1913-14, the Colorado Coal Project was extremely important. So one of the things that this collection does is it helps us get past the limitations of a lot of the contemporary sources. Because by the time this strike broke out in August of 1913, southern Colorado was an extraordinarily polarized place. In a very polarized nation. I mean, you know, I think we tend to think of our contemporary political landscape as one in which polarization is rampant, and it is. But I don't think we have anything on the early 1910s. particularly concerning issues of capital and labor. So one of the huge frustrations that we've all experienced in trying to investigate the events of 1913-14 is that this is a world in which there were very few, remotely neutral observers, and in which accounts were so partisan that it's actually difficult to get past the partisan viewpoints. Of course, the partisan viewpoints are themselves part of the story, but one of the things that this collection really helped me to do was to get past kind of this view of Ludlow, which is an important view, but sort of Ludlow as a moment of martyrdom, an event of victimization, where there's a sort of where there's a finality to the event and a kind of almost a sort of ossification of what happened at Ludlow in this marble form. And this is a wonderful statue. Everything that the commemorations that have gone on at Ludlow and that are continuing and actually reaching a sort of all-time fever pitch in this centennial year. All this is wonderful. I'm not trying to sort of badmouth any of that, but I think that there's as Ron's videos show, this is a collection that helps us arrive at an even richer and deeper understanding of what happened in 1913-14, and also to place the events of that strike in a much broader context. So for me, these polarized sources from 1913-14 I guess the Colorado Coal Project helped me place these in a bigger context. That was the sort of most important thing about them for me. This is a photograph of striking miners in the course of the 10 Days War. I think you might have seen a detail or two from this photograph and the series of which it's a part. These are striking miners who were engaging in this guerrilla war that followed the Ludlow Massacre. And so, one of the things that I really try to do in Killing for Coal is to try to understand these guys and the other fighters that we don't see here, the women and children that were also part of this struggle. And so, I think a lot of earlier scholars had done a really fine job on sort of the Union view of things, the view from sort of the leadership. But what I was really interested in doing was getting a little bit more at the rank and file in the course of this strike. And the Colorado Coal Project is a fabulous resource for trying to understand the everyday lives of Southern Colorado miners and to understand kind of the broader circumstances in which this strike erupted. So, in my book, Victor Bazzanelli, Alex Bussaco, these are guys that I quote repeatedly. And as historians, we're always pulling this strange kind of ventriloquy act. And, we sort of need these rich sources. We need these voices to be able to kind of, channel a little bit of the lived experience of people in the past and bring that to readers in the present day. Or in the case of this collection, this is a collection that brings this to bear in a sort of multimedia format. So, I use the Colorado Coal Project to get a better understanding of the lives and labors of Southern Colorado coal miners. I think that this is also a really valuable collection for looking at issues of memory. These are men who are sort of reformulating how they made sense of these events over time. Several of these interviews are conversations where there's at least two people present, and also, Ron mentioned this really fascinating process that they conducted in the course of making documentaries and so forth. This is and there was that one instance too toward the end there where one of the former mine workers said, "Well, what would you have done?" This is a place where we actually get to see history as more of a conversation than we typically do. Now, I also want to emphasize that this is a collection that up until now has been difficult to access. And in particular, what I think are some of the richest versions of this material, the audio and videos which you've seen, were basically impossible to use for many, many years. So when I was doing my research, I couldn't actually look at any of the videos or listen to the audio tapes. I had to look at the transcripts. And clearly, we miss a lot in transcripts. When you see sort of, I forget exactly how it was transcribed, but when Victor Bazzanelli is breaking down, I think it probably says, bracket, crying. And compare that to the emotional impact of hearing this man grappling with the horrors that he saw as a young man in the shattered ruins of Ludlow. I did have the opportunity to see an excerpt of one of the videos, and I don't remember exactly which one. I would, you know, if I sort of looked through, I would be able to locate it, but I can't remember off the top of my head who it was that was speaking. But you know, previous documentarians, as well as Ron and Eric Margolis, made, you know, I mean, they did use the videos to as footage for several documentaries. And so in the course of watching one of those, I saw a discussion of miners talking about the work that they did. And one of the things that was so fascinating about this and so important for my own work was they had a hard time putting it into words. So this is an issue, you know, this is a sort of matter that if you're reading through the transcript, these guys might seem inarticulate. It might seem like this sort of puzzling moment where men who spent their entire lives in coal mines couldn't describe kind of the basic labor process that they performed day in and day out. But when you see the video, when I watched the video, what I noticed was a lot of movement. These guys were actually sort of acting out this work. And what that, you know, this was a big aha for me. It helped me understand that these are guys who had an incredible amount of knowledge of their labor, but that you know, and these were, I was making a lot of very bourgeois assumptions. I mean, I was born and raised in Boulder, so what did I know about coal mining, right? Especially, you know, I was born in 1972, so the mining industry was not in very healthy shape by the time I was coming up. But what this helped me understand then was that there was this, you know, sort of incredible amount of embodied knowledge or tacit knowledge that mine workers had. And this is actually a really critical insight, just that moment of seeing that video, because that helped me ask more questions about what came to be really the pivotal chapter in my book. You know, it's the middle chapter, chapter 4, on what I call the mine workscape, which looks at the underground relationships between miners and the mine environment, and it also looks at the work cultures that developed in these places, because these work cultures really were the foundation for the oppositional politics that mine workers mounted not only in 1913-14, but in a string of other conflicts. And this is something that I'm not sure I ever really would have begun to investigate these questions if not for the work that Ron did and for the videos that are available here.
Ron Bouchard tried to talk us out of putting in, because he said nobody wants to know about that stuff.
Right, right, and that's what's so wonderful about this is this is a sort of like most historical documents. This is a collection that that sort of is much larger than the already expansive set of questions that you all brought to it, right? So I mean, you know, there's all sorts of questions, all sorts of fascinating things to be investigated that are latent in this collection. So let me see. I also want to just mention one other thing on sort of a lighter note, maybe that came out of to some extent the Colorado Coal Project, to some extent scattered oral histories and other collections in Colorado. Was sort of my favorite part of probably my favorite part of my book, and one that's led to what I'm working on now. And this is a little small section in my chapter on the mine workscape that looks at mules and mice and how miners related to these animals in the course of their underground work. And again, this is something that I really couldn't have begun to wonder about if people like Ron hadn't captured the voices and the experiences of these miners. And so this is a sort of small part of the book that led me to teach a class in the Animals History of the United States, which has now led to my next book project. So I'm sorry to go on such a personal note, but this is a very exciting event for me because this is a collection that's actually been incredibly important in my own career, and I think it's also a collection that's going to be incredibly valuable for other researchers and for students. So thank you all, and I'm going to turn it over to Dean now.
Thank you. While Holly's getting that set up, I'm really happy to be here for the launch of this resource. It looks like a fabulous, fabulous thing, which we had access, I think, to some of this material when we started our archaeological project back in 1997. But some of the stuff I've seen already kind of blows me away, and it's going to be a great resource for the public. And that is actually the point of our archaeological project. The archaeology, I think, will generate a distinctive set of information that we can use to flesh out the story of Ludlow and the strike. Like Tom, we're interested in the little people, the people who were out on strike, and we also did some work up at the coal camps. I think the history books are still relatively silent about day-to-day living, certainly in the strikers' colonies. So the point of our project is to contribute some knowledge and maybe even evaluate the historical record, claims made in the historical record about how miners lived. So I just want to spend some time talking about how the photographic archives were useful to us in doing the first ever archaeology at the Ludlow tent colony. Again, photographs of the folks that we're interested in, the 99%, the people without history, however you want to describe them. This is really the focus of a lot of interesting community-engaged archaeology these days. And our project is kind of, or at least in '97, it was on the leading edge of what we call community-engaged archaeology, working with descendant communities, collaborating with them to tell a story about the past. And of course, the descendant community in southern Colorado is the descendant community of trade unionists and miners. Just quickly, the project was funded by the State Historical Fund. The union didn't give us any money, but they gave us permission to work at the tent colony, that 40-acre site on which the monument is located. And these are the project goals. Again, what people were eating, how they were living when they were in the colony. As an anthropologist, I'm especially interested in how different ethnic groups integrated with each other. And this was a long and protracted strike through a long and nasty winter under a particular set of really trying conditions when the miners were routinely harassed by the company when they were out on strike. So these folks are a source of great admiration for us because of their ability to sort of integrate across ethnic and cultural lines to make this strike work. And then we're interested in any strategies that were used for winning hearts and minds, for gaining favor with sympathetic neighbors who may have helped support them during the 15 months of the strike. I came prepared to talk a little bit about the landscape and the archaeology, assuming that maybe the audience wouldn't know too much about what archaeologists do, but this is the Ludlow field today, looking back towards the monument that Tom showed some pictures of. The photographs can be really useful in talking to the public about how this landscape today was filled up back in the day with the tent colony. And then as archaeologists, of course, we're especially interested in the remains of the colony after the destruction of the tents. So stuff like this is crucial for us, for giving us kind of a leg up on what we can expect to find and use in our interpretations of everyday life at the tent colony. We used multiple techniques to investigate an archaeological site, and I think the one that's most relevant for us today is this photographic overlay technique that is routinely used in the eastern United States. Out here in the West, historic archaeology is kind of the red-headed stepchild of archaeology, because we have Mesa Verde, we have Chaco Canyon, we have all of this fabulous prehistoric stuff. So it's kind of been a hard sell to get historical archaeology off the ground in the West. And Easterners tend to look down their noses at us out here on the frontier, right? So, but that's changing, and I think it's changing as a result of the success of this project, both in reaching out to the community and, of course, the success we had in helping to elevate Ludlow into national landmark status. So we know this photograph was taken from a water tower adjacent to the railroad tracks that run by the tent colony. So what we did is get the negative of that photo and fit it into a specially designed camera that would allow us to look at the landscape from approximately the position of that water tower and then map on the landscape the edges of tents where we think that they may have been located. And it was through this technique that we did discover the outlines of the tents that were used by the strikers. A test pit disclosed this dark stain here, which is the edge of a tent. And then when we followed it out, we discovered a rectangular feature that fits perfectly with the size of the tents that were donated by the Mine Workers Union to the Ludlow strikers when they were out on strike. So a successful technique for locating those places where people were living. We had the good fortune to locate some tent cellars. Again, a historical photograph here that shows you this bed post. It's not the same as the one here, but this kind of excavation definitely tells us that we're in the right place for discovering the remains of the Ludlow strikers. Everyday artifacts, of course, familiar artifacts came out of our excavations. Blue enamel coffee pots here, buttons and forks and ceramic ware, Victorian teaware, which was one way that families, working class families at the time, could demonstrate their upward mobility by consuming Victorian teaware. And I think the company was promoting Americanization, and one form that Americanization would take would be the consumption of particular kinds of ceramic styles, in this case, the Victorian teaware. Of course, we get religious medallions, which can be an indicator of ethnicity. I should say that we've only excavated about 1% of the tent colony. We got a lot of stuff out of that 1%, but there's still a whole lot more to do at the site if we want to, again, trace interethnic relations, right? We were fortunate to discover some stuff that indicates perhaps an Italian Catholic ethnicity, but there's a whole lot more we have to do to document the distribution of ethnic markers if we're going to say anything about how different ethnic groups integrated during the course of the strike. And then suspender fasteners, belt fasteners, children's toys, which are especially evocative in the Ludlow context, especially when you find them juxtaposed against the ammunition. Right? I was reminded at a talk I gave just last night that when you're talking about conflict, maybe you should show some ammunition. I had to put this slide in today just so I could get some measure of completeness to this story. But we've got evidence of what was fired into the colony and then what was fired out, and the details are on the right side there in terms of what the strikers had and then what the militia had. So all of this is on a website that we created. You can get to this from the University of Denver's website. We got a bunch of stuff that about the history. We've got a photo gallery that borrows liberally from the Western History collection at the Denver Public Library, and then a digital atlas that we created that provides some information about the archaeological story at Ludlow. And our thinking is that this is going to be a nice complement to the kind of stuff that we're talking about today, which is certainly terrific. Maybe the best thing that's come out of the archaeology is a website that one of our graduate students created called Teach Ludlow. And it's on that site where you can find a lot of digitized pictures of artifacts that we've recovered from our excavation. So we're starting to digitize stuff to get it up there on the web so that people and scholars can use it. We've written some books that contain the story of our findings. I had a monograph that basically summarizes the results of the archaeology that was done over about 7 years. And then another volume just came out, which is an edited collection by graduate students and others that detail different aspects of the archaeology. If you want to know the story, there's a few bullet points about what we recovered from the archaeological excavations. A colony that was well planned and well ordered. We got a good sense of what people were eating, basically inexpensive cuts of meat, and eating a lot of food out of cans, nationally name brand canned goods, whose prices may have been lower than some other goods that might have been available to people living in Colorado at that time. I'm especially interested in the differences between the plain ware and the Victorian ware in terms of where we find those objects in archaeological deposits. And interestingly, it turns out that it seems like the plain ware was in greater use than the Victorian tea ware, which is something you would probably expect for people who are camping out for 15 months, right? They're going to use maybe the crappy stuff and keep the nice stuff that indicates upward mobility in American society relatively under lock and key. But there's also another story that can be told about the utility of plain ware in building the kind of class consciousness and shared identity that would make a strike go. Because the marking of class differences, even emergent class differences within a strike, within a group of strikers, might be problematic, right? It might complicate what they're trying to accomplish as a group. So far, we don't find any ethnic segregation of families within the camp. And then this is where we get into the evaluation of different kinds of history. As Tom sort of alluded to, passions can run high in southern Colorado about this story because you've got descendants not only of strikers but also of management. So it's a fine line that we have to walk in terms of reaching out to this community. We don't find any evidence of weapons of mass destruction, if you will. You know, one question is, where are the WMDs? Because the history books talk a lot about strikers who are armed to the teeth. Yeah, and our excavations don't reveal that kind of investment in ammunition and arms. And so it's sort of taking on the official history of the strike, at least the official military history of the site. And then locals who are descended from miners will sometimes talk about there being mass graves out on the prairie, where more people died during the course of the strike than the history books let on. We've done ground penetrating radar, and we haven't discovered anything that looks like mass graves on the prairie. So in a sense, we're kind of taking on that local folk vernacular history with the kind of stuff that we're doing. So I think this is a critical point where archaeology can contribute what we like to call a critical history of the strike that maybe can challenge those two other kinds of opposing histories. Okay. Just a few more slides to bring this to some close. I mentioned that the project is largely about reaching out to the community. So we've done that with museum exhibits. We put together a traveling history trunk that contained photographs and also archaeological objects that traveled all over the Denver area and got worn out in the process. You can no longer access that trunk. It was in such high demand. We put together a teacher institute to teach middle school and high school teachers about how to bring labor history into the curriculum. And it really is not there in Colorado middle and high schools yet. And then a traveling exhibit that we like to take to the memorial service to show the folks down in Trinidad and Walsenburg what we're finding on the excavations. Our work also led to an interpretive trail at the site. These blue and red markers come out of the archaeology where we just flesh out the interpretation with some maps and a timeline of events that, again, incorporates some of those photographs that are part of the collection about Ludlow. Of course, the NHL status, the National Landmark status, was huge. This happened in 2009. There were a lot of labor historians who helped us with this, but the Union and the National Park Service tell us that it really was the archaeology that put this nomination over the top. And that's something that gives us, as scholars, an enormous amount of pride and satisfaction to have a project that started in '97 where we had no idea about what we were going to find or if we would find anything out on that bit of prairie. To have that culminate in NHL status was really satisfying. So now the monument that Tom showed you earlier contains this plaque on the side that indicates that Ludlow is now a National Historic Landmark. And this is Bob Butero, the regional leader of the United Mine Workers. Okay? And we were also proud, it sounds like I'm boasting, but it's not about DU and it's not about DU anthropology. It's about the UMW and the National Park Service and some dedicated labor historians working with anthropologists to achieve this NHL status. So the State Historical Society gave us an award in 2013 for our conservation work at Ludlow. So that's a quick and dirty of what the archaeology has contributed to the story, and I think those resources combined with this fabulous stuff that you're launching today is really going to be a boon for both scholars and citizens who are interested in this story. So thank you very much.
Have they located the exact place where the children and 2 women were found dead? Is that a known site?
Well, you know, I've heard, I don't know what you guys have heard, but I've heard that there's some uncertainty about whether that is in fact the death pit. It's called the death pit where the women and children were found. So I don't feel like I can say with certainty that that's the hole.
The only thing that I know is, you weren't here when we were showing, Victor Bazzanelli, who was one of the survivors, claims in his interview that he helped build the cement walls in the pit, and that is the pit. But that's him saying that. But that's the only person who touched on that question of what's where. But he claims that was the hole where he dug down there in tears, fixing it up so you could go down in the. Have you been there? And you can go down in the cellar. I think you can still go down in there.
I think so.
Yeah.
I heard they're going to be doing some work down there to sort of.
Last time I was in there, I felt it was worse than being in a coal mine.
I think you said you had only done 1% of the. Is the project continuing?
We got about $900,000 from the Colorado Historical Society, and that took us through about 4 or 5 years of field work. And we had just been to the trough too many times for them to give us any more money. So if we want to go back, it'll probably require a National Endowment for the Humanities grant. We just reached a good stopping place. The money had run out. We had done some interpretive work at the site. And we've got a ton of stuff at the University of Denver that's awaiting analysis by graduate students. I mean, this was basically a graduate student-run project for graduate students to do theses and dissertations. So we welcome grad students anywhere, actually, who want to use this stuff for their research. Whether we'll continue is an open question.
From my reading, it seemed like the strike and the massacre caused quite a flurry of national attention, and then it dropped off. It's kind of hard to tell from the different. I've read your book, and I know that Upton Sinclair tried to keep it going by starting pickets of the Standard Oil, the Rockefellers in New York City, and I don't know any. And there was one thing that really struck me from reading this stuff is the degree of anger expressed in the Rocky Mountain News editorial after the massacre, and the number of officials who said some very strong things about the coal mine, the coal companies.
Yeah, I mean, these events prompted all sorts of, all sorts of personal and sort of collective reactions, and so. There are federal investigations in the wake of this, in which people like John D. Rockefeller Jr. were sort of, called to testify, and in which a lot of the victims at Ludlow were able to kind of tell their story of these events. There was definitely a very kind of strong, kind of progressive backlash in the wake of this. So. You mentioned the Rocky Mountain News. They'd sort of been to some extent converted over the course of the strike. A lot, I mean, Colorado did have a fairly strong progressive movement at this time, and so Colorado progressives responded in a variety of ways, mostly by calling for greater government regulation, more oversight over the industry, sometimes for measures like the socialization of the mines. But yeah, I mean, it's like pretty much everything. The memories were all too short, and so this was a conflict that died down, at least in sort of the broader consciousness fairly quickly. But there were ongoing efforts to try to commemorate it. So I mean, the memorial itself, right, is partly an effort by the United Mine Workers in 1918 to say, look, something really important happened here. This is sacred ground to the American labor movement.
And I mean, anecdotally in the collection, there are a lot of people who talk about that transition of having lost the strike, ultimately going back to work to rebuild all those mines that they had just destroyed because, what could we do? But Rockefeller, it's just like today. When you have, whether it's a bridge in New Jersey or whatever, all of a sudden the spin really cranked up around Wilson had there was a commission, Rockefeller and his people had to testify, and ultimately he came here. You've seen photos of him donning the miners, these crisply pressed overalls, dancing with the miners' wives and so on. But then the Rockefeller industrial plan that came out of that was, I'll never recognize the union, but as a benevolent capitalist, I will now come in and build schools and YMCAs and such. And so that sort of calmed that situation, but that didn't stop the miners from striking again in 21 and again in 27 and so on. So a lot of it there was a lot of spin because there were a lot of editorials in the New York papers and in the national news too. Like everything, I think their news cycle was a little longer than it is today, but he was never loved that I could find, but people recognized at least, now I had a YMCA.
Yeah, he hired Ivy Lee, the public relations.
That's true.
That's true. Right, and there were, there were also really reactionary legacies of all of this as well. I mean, in the fall of 1914, Colorado elects a new governor who really runs on a law and order platform, and I think it's important to see Ludlow as one of the events that helped lead to Klan rule in Colorado in the 1920s. I mean,
there's a lot of talk in these tapes about the Klan from that period through the 20s. My mother was the daughter of a Greek miner here in Lafayette, and she remembers crosses being burnt. This Longmont, Lafayette, the Klan had a lot of activity against coal miners, oriented at the dirty Greeks and the WAPs and so on.
Yeah, I mean, that version of the Klan was very anti-immigrant, very anti-Catholic, and very anti-union.
Interesting. Yeah. One little short thing. When Michael Dulac was we had this card system that had all 4,000, how many slides? And everything had like this, if this hole's punched, it means this and this and this, and he went around, I don't know how many categories there were, but they were figuring it out. And he found this thing that there was a notch punched out of the corner that it didn't have anything written up. So he was doing the metadata around this. So he called me in and he said, can you figure out why these cards are associated with these slides? And I said, it's the mules. All of a sudden, as we got into the project, I was fascinated to hear what you just said. The mules were a big part of there's conversation after conversation. Yeah. So we had run out of holes with names, and so we just found a place in the card to punch, and that became this special spot. And then 40 years later, we rediscovered the mules.
Well, thank you all very much. This was really interesting.
Thank you. Website.